you for that excellent introduction, Mission. Hello, I am Michelle Shortt, the chapter head for the Arizona chapter of the Satanic Temple. I've been a self-identified Satanist since 2001 and a member of the Satanic Temple since 2014, roughly around when the Baphomet Monument was first announced to be constructed. I have 12 years of experience as an erotic entertainer and 5 years of experience as a model in the fetish and erotica segments of modeling. So tonight's lecture, I will be discussing satanic feminism in the adult entertainment industry. Sex workers use sexual liberation as a self-empowerment tool, and the implementation of what we Satanists like to call lesser magic is used to achieve the end goal, which is usually the form of monetary compensation for the rendering of services. However, satanic feminism has had a colorful history, which we will now discuss. A well-known satanic concept that we all, as Satanists, have identified with is the concept that we are our own God. We take advantage of our strengths, we revel in our accomplishments, and we also admit when we're at fault, and we take ownership of the consequences that come from that. We encourage the pursuit of knowledge as well as sexual liberation in whatever form we so choose. As opposed to, say, Christianity, where all these aspects, satanic aspects that we hold dear, they are viewed in a negative light. Sexual repression is in itself a Christian aspect that has infiltrated our culture and stunted our population's perspective into believing sex and anything associated with it to be shunned and viewed with disdain. For centuries, free-thinking and sexually liberated women, in particular, have been the victims of persecution, and many were subsequently labeled as witches. And if they were lucky, they were exiled from the communities, or, as we know, as in the Salem witch trials, worse. Excuse me. Which leads me to satanic feminism within the Miltonic Romantic literature. Mary Wollstonecraft is best known for A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, published in 1792, in which she argues that women are not naturally inferior to men, but appear only to be because they lack education. She suggests that both men and women should be treated as rational beings and imagines a social order founded on reason. Wollstonecraft's advocacy of women's equality and critiques of conventional femininity became increasingly important. Today, Wollstonecraft is regarded as one of the founding feminist philosophers, and feminists often cite her life and work as important influences. Romantic women writers found a surprising range of poetic uses for Milton's Satan, the most significant being a vision of outcast female genius, hurled from the celestial sphere for having claimed equality, a satanic, feminist, romantic vision. Before Byron and Shelley rediscovered in Satan a conflicted Prometheanism, and long before Robert Southey's reactionary critique of the Satanic school in 1821, romantic writers found in Milton's hero surprising echoes of their own struggles. Wollstonecraft has written, "There's a degree of boldness in her conceptions and masculine energy in her style that is very imposing. There is a gloomy grandeur in her imagination, while she explores the regions of intellect without chart or compass, which gives one the idea of genius wandering through chaos. This ambivalently romantic vision of Wollstonecraft as Satan traversing through chaos, and using both scripture and reason to tempt women with equality. This marks an important point of confluence between opposing political uses of Satan as both heroic and revolutionary, as both a heroic revolutionary and a willful destroyer." So female writers, such as Wollstonecraft, go against everything what a traditional woman should stand for. And the concept of Eve is viewed as the perfect woman, innocent and subservient to Adam. And in turn, masculinity is attributed to what we see as Satan. You know, he's a tempter and lured Eve away from innocence. So this vision of satanic masculinity complements the role of fallen femininity. Both have abandoned the divine order for the false promise of liberty. So Eve was willing to give up everything for the pursuit of knowledge, and many feminists were able to relate to this. These conservative allegories of satanic temptation hint at Satan's seductiveness, political, sexual, and intellectual, in order to better serve their didactic purposes of shoring up women's resistance and redeeming Eve. Before the fall, Adam gives life to Eve, and after the fall, it is Eve who gives life to Adam, who redeems him and history and restores paradise to both. So in a sense, as I was saying, Eve is the epitome of a perfect wife, associated with motherhood and the creation of all that is man. In contrast, sex workers are seen as complete opposites. They're usually not seen as mothers. They're seen usually as objects for men to lust after. Later, I will explain how sex workers use this archaic notion to their advantage. In this model, though, distinct from the idealization of Eve, we find a romantic and feminist vision of women's poetic genius as satanic. The sign of the woman poet is satanic, especially back then, where women were discouraged from writing, reading. Women's earlier uses of Satan's rebellion to symbolize a feminist and intellectual struggle. Wollstonecraft thus implies that a woman's intellectual innocence is actually formulated in masculine terms of coercive prohibition. Innocence is actually a state of ignorance and feminine weakness. This satanic feminism was recognized as such by conservative writers who deliberately allied women's pursuit of forbidden knowledge with the fallen angel. So, as we see, Satan being the masculine form, and Eve being the innocent, the virginal type, we see a sort of dichotomy between the two. Innocence meaning virginal and evil being lustful. And therefore, the term carnal knowledge appears. Carnal knowledge meaning, anything to do with sex and the knowledge that comes with that. And so we see the pornification and sexualization of Satan. The fact that modern uses of carnal knowledge in the West carry connotations of torture and supernatural evil appears to be attributable to the transformation of pagan cosmologies at the hands of early Christian apologists. This process of creating meaningful cosmologies around narratives of sexual encounters can be seen from classical myths of sexual congress between mortals and gods to witch theory. As Walter Stevens observes, witchcraft was regarded as inherently sexual. Kramer believed that witchcraft and sexual immorality were necessary complements to each other. The Malleus Maleficarum states that sexual congress with demons is a categorical requirement for being a witch. And this is a quote from it. Mark well, too, that among other things, witches have to do 4 deeds to the increase of the perfidy. That is, to deny the Catholic faith in whole or in part through verbal sacrilege, to devote themselves body and soul to the devil, to offer up to the evil one himself infants not yet baptized, and to persist in diabolic filthiness through carnal acts with incubus and succubus demons. Note that actually casting maleficium is not a requirement, but intercourse with demons is. Despite the fact that these theologians saw sex as sinful, erotic knowledge somehow remained the highest form of epistemology. Only by creating an archive of confessions, describing copulation with demons in the physical space, could the reality of demons, and therefore angels, be proved. The inquisitors were actually demonologists for whom the persecution of witches was a means to this end. the satanic connection with sex and nature gained further complexity because of Satan's historic association with the ancient gods of the woods, as Shelley called them, the pagan gods and spirits of the natural world. The identification of Satan with the old nature gods, or the great god Pan, opened up vast possibilities of association and sometimes enabled Satan to grow into a kind of universal earth god. And so this continued, this interpretation that sexuality is indicative of an evil presence. And we fast forward to the late 1980s, early 90s, and we can view that this idea that sex is inherently evil to be, for those feminist groups to fight among this idea. So one feminist group believes that porn is good and sexuality is good, and the other one believes it isn't. So the inhibition of a woman's sexual desires and erotic prowess is not inherently a feminist viewpoint, as it insinuates her body's natural urges to be sinful or exploitative of her womanly demeanor. This position that sexuality is in essence a form of abuse was adopted by early feminist groups and fueled many cases during the Satanic Panic era. We can see this in the coercion of children during the SRA cases. Formal advocacy groups like Believe the Children use methods to interrogate, or Believe the Children only believed the confessions that were obtained during the SRA cases. So the methods that were used to interrogate the children in the famous cases such as Keller or McMartin shows evident coercion methods that were used on the children in the forms of leading questions or suggestive toy plushies. Quack doctors and officials concluded that this was evidence to support satanic ritual abuse, because the children should be ignorant of such carnal knowledge. Again, innocence, being ignorant of sexuality, all ties into each other. It can be argued that the phenomenon known as the Satanic Panic is directly descended from the witch hunts of early modern Europe. The fear that society has been infiltrated by agents of Satan can be traced in America back to the Puritans. The belief in SRA, the satanic ritual abuse, that Satanists are torturing and sexually abusing children for religious purposes did not arise until the late 20th century. And while the scope of satanic conspiracy theories has no bounds, at the center there is always a sexual trauma. Frankenfurter notes that the published stories of SRA place a sexual monstrosity at the center of a tableau of evil. And as we know, SRA is allied with psychotherapy and founded on the premise that traumatic memories are repressed, up to the point where some women who were interrogated who adamantly said, "I have not been abused," were not believed because their memories must have been repressed due to the significant sexual trauma. So, we are now led to feminist groups who are against pornography. Kamener attributes the Satanic Panic to the convergence of three cultural forces: the recovery movement, feminism, and the Christian right. Kamener suggests that, in part, the hysteria represented cultural resistance to women's liberation and changing gender roles. The daycare providers that became the target of SRA accusations were enabling women to have careers. Yet, paradoxically, the feminist movement was particularly susceptible to the Satanic Panic. 126 feminists supported accusations of SRA in solidarity with the support of rape victims. A strange alliance seems to have formed between feminists and the Christian right. Both groups were opposed to pornography, and Satanic Panic linked this issue to far darker and larger social problems, which we will later discuss. But first, I would love to talk about my favorite satanic terminology, which is lesser magic.